Unanimous consent that the veto message on H.R. 6395 received from the House be considered as having been read, spread in full upon the journal, and be printed in the record.
Without objection.
I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Act the 60th Annual National Defense Authorization Act into law. Yesterday, a bipartisan supermajority in the House voted to reapprove the conference report of this must-pass legislation. Today, the Senate will set up a final vote for tomorrow, Wednesday, for this chamber to follow suit. Soon, this important legislation will be passed into law. President Trump has rightly noted that this year's defense bill does not contain every provision that we Republicans would have wanted. I'm confident our Democratic colleagues feel the same way. But that is the case every year. And yet for 59 consecutive years and counting, Washington has put our differences aside, found common ground, and passed the annual defense bill. Not once in 6 decades has a Congress let its differences prevent it from completing this work for our national security and our men and women who wear the uniform. This year's NDAA will continue our momentum in rebuilding and modernizing our armed forces. It will authorize the personnel, equipment, tools, and training we need to reinforce the national defense strategy and to deter great power rivals like China and Russia. It will cement our advantage on the seas, on land, in the air, in cyberspace, and in space. And the bill will help us continue to recruit, retain, and support the men and women who keep us safe. It provides a pay raise for the troops, improvements for military housing, child care, and more. So, Madam President, for the brave men and women of the United States Armed Forces, failure is simply not an option. So when it's our turn in Congress to have their backs, failure is not an option either. I would urge my colleagues to support this legislation one more time when we vote tomorrow. Now, on another matter, on Sunday, President Trump signed into law another historic bipartisan rescue package. It will provide major support to American families through what we hope will be the home stretch of our fight with the coronavirus. Congressional Republicans, Congressional Democrats, and President Trump's senior team had all worked together to pass hundreds of billions more dollars in urgent assistance to the people who need it most. This new law will set up a targeted second round of paycheck protection to save jobs. It will renew and continue federal programs that have helped laid-off workers endure the crisis. It will send more cash to households. It will invest billions in vaccine distribution so the success of Operation Warp Speed kills the pandemic as fast as possible, and much more. This bipartisan compromise was our shot at getting help to working families on the urgent timeline that they need. Once again, I want to applaud President Trump for signing the bill and getting this much-needed assistance into the pipeline. During this process, the President highlighted 3 additional issues of national significance he would like to see Congress tackle together. First, as he explained, the President would like further direct financial support for American households. Second is the growing willingness on both sides of the aisle to at least re-examine the special legal protections afforded to technology companies under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, including the ways it benefits some of the most prosperous, most powerful big tech firms. And the third subject, since every American, regardless of their politics, should feel the integrity of our democracy is beyond reproach, is exploring further ways to protect the sanctity of America's ballots while continuing to respect the federal government's limited role in standing behind state and local government who actually run elections. Those are the 3 important subjects the President has linked together This week, the Senate will begin a process to bring these three priorities into focus. I move to proceed to calendar the bill, with the opponent time being controlled by Senator Paul or his designee. Further, upon the use or yielding back of that time, the Senate vote on passage of the bill, the objections of the President to the contrary notwithstanding. Finally, if passed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
The Democratic leader.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Now, the Senate is here this week for a rare holiday session to address two major issues: the President's veto of the annual defense bill and the effort to send $2,000 survival checks to millions and millions of American families, something Senate Democrats strongly support. The Senate should be in session to address both issues. There are only a few days left in this session. We should not adjourn until the Senate holds a vote on both measures, the NDAA veto override and the House bill to provide $2,000 checks for the American people. As we all know, the Majority Leader controls the schedule on the floor. So Leader McConnell holds the key to unlocking this dilemma. The solution is a simple one. Put both bills up for a simple up or down vote, and then let the chips fall where they may. I believe both measures will pass, as they should. But Leader McConnell must allow the Senate to vote on both pieces of legislation, the defense bill and the $2,000 checks, before we go home. We will start the process on overriding the President's veto of the defense bill tomorrow. Today, at the end of my remarks, I will ask the Senate's consent to take up the House-passed bill to provide the American people immediate survival checks of $2,000 a person. Throughout this pandemic, working Americans have taken it on the chin. Right now, they're facing their hardest and their darkest days. Tens of millions have lost their jobs. Tens of millions are struggling to put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads. In the wealthiest nation on earth, modern-day bread lines stretch for miles down American highways. The fastest way to get money into Americans' pockets is to send some of their tax dollars right back from where they came. $2,000 stimulus checks could mean the difference between American families having groceries for a few extra weeks or going hungry. The difference between paying the rent or being kicked out of your home that you've lived in for years. It could buy precious time for tens of millions of people as the vaccine, thankfully, makes its way across the country. Of course, we could have taken up this issue weeks ago. In the COVID bill Congress just passed, Democrats wanted generous direct payments to the American people. Speaker Pelosi and I repeatedly asked our Republican counterparts how much they could support. Their answer, $600. It was a compromise many of us were not happy about. I came to the floor myself with the senator from Vermont to ask that we double at least the size of those checks. A Republican senator objected. $600 was the most Republicans would support. Well, my colleagues and my fellow Americans, $600 is not enough. Not enough for the mother in Nashville, $4,000 behind on the rent, whose water was shut off earlier this month. Not for the medical receptionist in Macomb, $2,100 behind on the rent, whole electricity shut off in September on her son's third day of virtual kindergarten. Not for the 12 million Americans who have fallen on average nearly $6,000 behind on their rent and their utilities, or the 26 million Americans who have had trouble putting food on the table in the past 5 days. $600? Nope, it's not enough. So in a moment, I will move to have the Senate take up the House bill to increase that number to $2,000, which I might add had broad bipartisan support. I don't want to hear that we can't afford it. I don't want to hear that it would add too much to the deficit. Senate Republicans added nearly $2 trillion to the deficit to give corporations a massive tax cut. Republicans just fought to include a tax break for 3 martini lunches in the COVID relief bill. So I don't want to hear it that it costs too much to help working families get a check when they're struggling to keep their jobs, pay their families, pay their rent, feed their families, and live a halfway normal and decent life. Even in our deeply divided times, Madam President, this issue has united Americans from coast to coast and bridged the massive political divide here in Washington. A vast majority of the public, Republican and Democrat, strongly support $2,000 checks. An overwhelming bipartisan majority in the House supports 2,000 checks. Senate Democrats strongly support $2,000 checks. Even President Trump supports $2,000 checks. There's one question left today. Do Senate Republicans join with the rest of America in supporting $2,000 checks? Now, some of my Republican colleagues have said they support the checks, but there's a major difference in saying you support $2,000 checks and fighting to put them into law. The House bill is the only way to deliver these stimulus checks before the end of session. Will Senate Republicans fight for a vote on the House-passed Cash Act, or will they look some other way? Will Senate Republicans stand against the House of Representatives, the Democratic majority in the Senate, and the president of their own party to prevent these $2,000 checks from going out the door? We're about to get the answers to these questions. So now, Madam President, I ask consent to set the Madam President, where am I? Would the senator modify his request to include a unanimous consent request that that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 9051, a bill received from the House to increase recovery rebate amounts to $2,000 per individual, that the bill be read a third time and passed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate?
Is there objection to the modification?
Object.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request? The senator from Vermont.
Thank you, Madam President. Reserving the right to object. We should all be very, very clear. The working class of this country today faces more economic desperation than at any time since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And working families need help now. Not next year, but right now. Last night, the House of Representatives, with a 2/3 majority, 275 to 134, 2/3 bipartisan vote, moved to increase the direct payment going to working families from $600 per adult to $2,000 per adult. The House did the right thing. I congratulate them. And now it is time for the Senate to step up to the plate and do what the working families of this country overwhelmingly want us to do. Madam President, as a result of the pandemic, tens of millions of Americans have lost their jobs and their incomes. These families in the middle of the winter now face the threat of eviction and the possibility of being thrown out in the streets. Hunger in America is at the highest level that it has been for decades, with moms and dads struggling to feed their kids and working families lining up mile after mile to get emergency food packages. We are even seeing an increase in grocery store shoplifting as desperate Americans try to keep their families from going hungry. All of this taking place in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. Madam President, over the last number of years, as I think everybody in America knows, Congress has provided massive tax breaks for the very wealthiest people in our country, which is one of the reasons why today we have more income and wealth inequality than any time since the 1920s. In fact, in the midst of this pandemic, this terrible pandemic, inequality has grown worse, with many in the billionaire class seeing their wealth increase by hundreds of billions of dollars, while average Americans struggle to put food on the table. Congress has given huge tax breaks for large corporations so that some of the most profitable and largest corporations in America today pay zero in federal income taxes. We have just passed the largest military budget in the history of our country, $740 billion, more than the next 10 nations combined. And by the way, there was almost no debate about the size of that huge budget. Trump's veto dealt with other issues. Meanwhile, over 500,000 Americans are homeless. Half of our working families are struggling to survive paycheck to paycheck. And in the midst of this terrible, unprecedented pandemic, over 90 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured in the midst of a pandemic, and they're not sure whether they can afford to go to a doctor. Madam President, we are coming to the close of one of the most terrible and painful years in American history. That is a tragic fact. Over 330,000 of our people have died from COVID-19, and as we speak, we are seeing record-breaking numbers of new cases and hospitals around the country being overwhelmed with new admissions. During the last year, the education and well-being of tens of millions of our young people, from childcare to graduate school, has been disrupted. And the terrible emotional isolation that this pandemic has caused, where people are unable to spend time with their family or their friends, has resulted in a huge increase in mental illness, drug addiction, and even suicide. Madam President, as I mentioned, the House has done the right thing. By an overwhelming vote, Democrats and Republicans voted to increase that $600 direct payment to $2,000. Recent poll came out. 78% of the American people think that was the right decision. They're hurting. They want help. The leaders of our country, President Trump, President-elect Biden, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, are all in agreement. We have got to raise that direct payment to $2,000.